The crystal water pitcher shattered against the dining room wall about 6 inches from my left ear. And for a second, I just sat there listening to the pieces settle on the hardwood floor my late wife had picked out in the spring of 1987. My son's wife was still standing. She had thrown it underhand, almost casual, like a kid skipping a stone. Her napkin was twisted in her other fist. The Thanksgiving turkey was between us on the table, untouched, steam curling up off the white meat, like nothing had happened at all. "Are you listening to me?" she said. I was listening. I had been listening for about 40 minutes. I had also been listening for about 4 years, if I'm being honest. But that afternoon was the first time anyone had thrown a piece of crystal at my head, so I figured the listening part was over. My son was looking at his plate. 62 years old, I was sitting there, a widower of 9 years, in the house I built, with my own hands on a lot my father gave me before he passed. And my own boy could not lift his eyes to look at me. He had a roll in his fingers, and he was pulling little pieces off it and rolling them into pellets between his thumb and his pointer finger and lining them up next to his fork. He was 41 years old. His wife sat back down. She smoothed the front of her dress like she was the one who had been wronged. She picked up her wine glass and took a sip, and she looked at me over the rim, and she said very quietly, "Pass the gravy, please." I sat there for a long moment. The grandfather clock in the hall was ticking. My grandson, 8 years old, the only good thing any of us had managed to make in the last decade, was upstairs in the guest room with his headphones on, watching cartoons on the tablet I had bought him for his birthday. He had been excused from the table before the yelling started, because his mother had the sense to know it was coming. She had planned for it. She had planned every part of it. I picked up the gravy boat. I passed it across the table. I did not say a word. She smiled at me, a small, satisfied smile, the kind you give a dog that finally learned to sit. "Thank you," she said. "I knew you'd see reason." Reason. The reason in question was a stack of papers she had laid down next to my dinner plate before the prayer. The reason was a deed transfer. The reason was the house. This house. Every board and beam and nail of it, into a trust under her name and my son's, with provisions that I could continue to reside in the property, so long as I followed certain rules. The rules were on the 3rd page. I'd only gotten as far as the 2nd page when the pitcher hit the wall. I am going to tell you what happened next, and I am going to ask you, before I do, to do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. I am a 62-year-old man telling you a true story about what happened in my own dining room too. Thanksgivings ago, and I am telling it because I think there are other folks out there, men and women both, who are sitting at tables right now eating cold food and swallowing crystal glass and thinking they have to keep on swallowing it. You don't. That is the whole point of why I am here. You don't. Now let me tell you about my daughter-in-law. Her name was Tessa. I am going to call her Tessa because that was her name, and I'm too old to be fancy about it. She came into our lives the summer my son turned 33. He had been in a long stretch of nothing, laid off from the engineering firm, drinking too much, sleeping on my couch for most of a year. My wife had passed 4 years before, and the boy had taken it hard. We both had. The house was too quiet. I won't pretend I wasn't glad when he started dating again. Tessa was 30 at the time, 2 jobs behind her. Both ended badly according to her. Both ended for what I'd later understand were the same reasons. She was pretty enough. Tall, dark hair, very good clothes for somebody who claimed to be working retail. She laughed at all my jokes the first time she came to Sunday dinner. And she asked about my wife. And she cried a little when I showed her the garden my wife had planted. And I thought, this is a kind girl. This is a girl who understands what we've been through. I was 62 years old when she threw the pitcher. I had been 62 for about 3 months, and in the time between that first Sunday dinner and that Thanksgiving, 11 years had gone by, and I had been a damn fool for every single one of them. She married my son on the back porch of this house. I walked her down the makeshift aisle because her own father wouldn't come. She said he was estranged, said he had been cruel, and I believed her. I believed her. I believed every word that woman ever told me for about the first 4 years. By year 5, I had started to notice the pattern. By year 7, I had started to keep a notebook. By year 9, I had started to talk to my lawyer. The pattern was money. The pattern is always money in stories like mine. She would come to me with a problem, a medical bill, a car repair, an opportunity, an investment, a friend in trouble. The first one was $800 for a deposit on an apartment before they were married. I gave it gladly. The second was $3,000 for her mother's funeral, and I gave that gladly too, even though I had to scrape it together from a CD I'd been saving for my grandson's college fund, which at that point was theoretical because my grandson did not yet exist. By the time my grandson did exist, a boy named after my own father, born on a January morning in a hospital across the river, I had given her, by my notebook's count, somewhere north of $51,000. I had not told my son about any of it. She had asked me not to. She said it would embarrass him. She said he was already insecure about not being the provider. She said it would damage their marriage if he found out. And out of love for my boy, I kept my mouth shut. And that is the part I will not forgive myself for as long as I live. She got pregnant the second year of the marriage. Things were good for about 6 months. Then they started moving in. I want you to understand how this happened, because it didn't happen all at once. It happened the way a man drowns in the lake. Slow at first, you don't even notice the waters over your shoes. And then all of a sudden you can't touch bottom, and you can't see the shore. They came for Thanksgiving the first year with the baby. They stayed through Christmas because there had been a pipe burst in their apartment. They stayed through New Year's because the landlord was being unreasonable. By February, they had moved their bedroom set into the guest room, and Tessa had repainted the kitchen without asking me. By June, she had taken down the photographs of my wife from the hallway because she said they made her feel watched. I took the photographs down and put them in a box in the basement. I told myself I was being a good father. I told myself my wife would understand. My wife would not have understood. My wife would have run that woman out of this house with a broom inside of 3 weeks. But my wife was not here, and I was a lonely old man, and Tessa was very good. I have to give her this. She was very good at making me feel like I had a family again. The grandbaby was the trap. I see that now. The grandbaby is always the trap. They knew, both of them, what that boy meant to me. I had lost my own boy in some ways. Lost him to that woman. Lost him in increments to the slow erosion of his spine. But the grandson loved me. The grandson would come find me in the workshop out back and want to learn how to use the lathe. The grandson would fall asleep on my chest, watching old westerns. The grandson called me Papa, and I would have walked through fire for that little boy. And they knew it, and they used it. The rule started the year my grandson turned 5. Suddenly there were things I wasn't allowed to do. I wasn't allowed to give him candy. I wasn't allowed to take him out to the workshop unsupervised. I wasn't allowed to drive him in my truck because my truck did not have the right car seat, even though I had bought the right car seat the week before and installed it myself. I wasn't allowed to read him the books I had read to my own son because Tessa said they had outdated values. She got rid of my wife's old children's books. I found them in a donation box in the garage, and I took them back out and hid them in the workshop, in the cabinet over the bandsaw, where she would never look. By year 10, the rules had multiplied. I had to be out of the kitchen by 6 p.m. so she could cook in peace. I had to ask before having friends over. I had to use the downstairs bathroom because they needed the upstairs one for the baby. I had to keep the television volume below a certain number. I had to stop wearing my work boots in the house. I want you to remember something. This was my house. Every nail. My name on the deed, paid off in 2003, free and clear. I had built it, and I was being told, in my own home, what time I had to be done with the kitchen. I want to tell you that I fought back. I want to tell you I stood up to her. I didn't. I made my peace with it because I thought, where would I go? What would I do? My boy was here. My grandson was here. And I told myself, an old man telling himself comfortable lies, that she would settle down eventually. That she was stressed, that she loved my son, and that meant she loved me in some second cousin sort of way. Then I found the will. I want to be careful how I say this part, because it is the hinge of the whole story. About 8 months before that Thanksgiving, I was looking for a flashlight in the kitchen junk drawer, and the drawer stuck, and when I yanked it, I pulled it all the way out, and a folder fell out from behind it. A manila folder. Not mine. I had never seen it before. I almost put it back. Some part of me already knew what was inside, and that part of me did not want to see. But I was 62 years old and tired, and so I sat down at the kitchen table and I opened the folder. It was a draft of a will. My will, or what my will was supposed to be, in the version Tessa had prepared with a lawyer I had never met. Everything to my son. Everything. The house, the savings, the workshop, the truck, the tools, the lot, the lake cabin that had been my father's, everything to my son, with my daughter-in-law named as executor and trustee, and a small provision, 3 pages back, in language that took me an hour to parse, that gave her power of attorney over my finances and my medical care in the event of diminished capacity. The will was dated 4 months earlier. It had a signature line for me at the bottom. The signature line was blank. There was also a second document, a draft letter from a doctor I had never met, on letterhead from a practice I had never visited, stating that I had been observed to exhibit signs of early-stage cognitive decline, and that my judgment in financial matters could not be relied upon. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I think the dog came in and sat by my feet at some point. I do remember that I did not cry. I did not get angry either. What I got was very, very still. I got the kind of still I used to get in the army, a long time ago, when something had gone wrong and the noise in my head went all the way down to nothing and I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I put the folder back exactly where I had found it. I pushed the drawer back in. I made a sandwich. I ate the sandwich standing up at the counter, looking out at the garden my wife had planted, which had become overgrown because Tessa did not like to garden and would not let me hire a man to come tend to it because she said it was a waste of money. Then I went out to my workshop, and I called the only person in the world I still trusted, which was my old friend who had been my lawyer and my fishing buddy for 30 years. I am not going to use his name. I'll just say he was the kind of man who would drive across 3 counties at midnight if he needed him to, and had on one memorable occasion in 1994 involving my late brother. He answered on the second ring. I said, "I need you to come out to the house. Bring a notepad." He said, "When?" I said, "Tomorrow. And don't park in the driveway." He parked at the end of the road by the mailboxes and he walked the 1/4 mile up to the workshop on foot. I made him coffee. I showed him the folder. I had photographed every page on my phone the night before, after Tessa had gone to bed, and I had printed the photos out at the library, and I had put the originals back exactly the way I found them. He looked through everything twice. He did not say much. He had known my wife. He had been at our wedding. When he was done reading, he closed the folder, and he took off his glasses, and he polished them on his shirt, and he said, "How long have you suspected?" I said, "About 4 years." He said, "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I said, "Because I'm a damn fool." He said, "Well, you're not anymore." And we got to work. What we did over the next 8 months, I'm going to summarize because the details would bore you, and some of them are things I prefer not to put on the internet. But the broad strokes were these. First, my friend the lawyer drew up a real will, my real will, signed and witnessed and notarized and lodged with his firm under a code phrase only he and I knew. The real will left the house and the cabin in a trust for my grandson, untouchable until he turned 25. It left my son a small amount, enough to remember me by, not enough to give to that woman. It left Tessa exactly $1, with a paragraph explaining why, which my lawyer had advised against, and which I had insisted on because I am a petty man in my old age, and I have earned the right to be. Second, we hired a private investigator, a quiet fellow, very thorough, who came recommended through my lawyer's office. He spent 3 months following my daughter-in-law and documenting what she did with her days, which was supposed to be working at a real estate office downtown. It turned out the real estate office was real, but her job at the real estate office was theoretical. She had been fired 18 months earlier and had not told my son. What she had been doing instead was meeting with a man at a hotel out by the interstate on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The investigator brought me photographs. I looked at them once, and then I put them in a folder of my own. Third, we found the lawyer, the one who had drafted the fake will. He was a young fellow, recently disbarred in a neighboring state and trying to practice on the quiet here. And when my lawyer paid him a visit and explained the situation to him, which my lawyer did, alone, and which I will not ask him about until he chooses to tell me, the young man became very cooperative and provided a sworn statement about the circumstances of the draft. He had been paid in cash by Tessa. He had never met me. He had been told I was nonverbal. Fourth, and this was the part that hurt, we found the doctor. The doctor was real. The doctor was the husband of a woman Tessa knew from her gym. The doctor had signed the letter without ever examining me as a favor, in exchange for $1,000 and Tessa's silence about a matter I will not discuss here. My investigator was very thorough. Fifth, and this was the hard one, the one that took me 3 weeks of sleepless nights to commit to. We built a case against my son, not for the same things as Tessa. He had not forged anything. He had not, so far as we could tell, met with that lawyer or that doctor. But he had known. The investigator was able to show, through phone records and text messages obtained by means I am not going to describe, that my son had known about the planned will. He had known about the planned diagnosis. He had not initiated it, but he had not stopped it. He had told his wife, in one text message, "I will remember until the day I die. He'll sign whatever we put in front of him. Just be nice to him for a few months." I read that text message standing in my workshop with the door closed and the light off, and I stood there in the dark for a long time, and I thought about my boy at 4 years old, riding on my shoulders at the state fair, eating a candy apple. And I thought about my boy at 8, the time he got bit by the neighbor's dog, and I carried him 3 blocks to the emergency room. And I thought about my boy at 16, the night he wrecked his first car, and how he had cried in the passenger seat of my truck on the way home, and how I had told him it was okay. It was just metal. It didn't matter. He was what mattered. He'll sign whatever we put in front of him. Just be nice to him for a few months. I went into the house. I went up to my grandson's room. He was asleep with the stuffed bear under one arm and his mouth open. I sat on the edge of his bed and I put my hand on his back and I felt him breathing, and I made my decision. It took us 6 more months to put the rest of it together. By the time Tessa laid that folder of papers next to my Thanksgiving plate, I had 3 banker's boxes in the back of my workshop, padlocked with everything we needed. Now, back to the dinner. I passed her the gravy. She smiled. She had been sure for a long time that she had me beat. She had spent 6 weeks softening me up before that Thanksgiving. Small kindnesses, a new sweater, a framed picture of the grandson for my desk. She thought she was going to walk me through the papers over dessert. She thought my son's silence and the broken pitcher would be enough to push me over the edge. I waited until she had served herself. I waited until she had taken a bite. I waited until she had taken a bite. I waited until she had asked my son to compliment the turkey, which he did weakly. Then I said, I have a guest coming. She paused with her fork in the air. What? I said. A guest. He should be pulling up any minute. I invited him for dessert. She set her fork down. You didn't tell me you invited someone. I said, I forgot. The doorbell rang. My lawyer was on the porch. He was wearing a sport coat over a flannel shirt, which is the dressiest thing he owns, and he was carrying a leather portfolio under his arm. Behind him on the walk was the investigator, a quiet man in a dark coat, also carrying a folder. And behind the investigator, sitting in the running car at the bottom of the driveway with its lights off, was a sheriff's deputy. A friend of a friend, there purely as a witness because my lawyer had advised me that in a situation like this, it was good to have a man in uniform on the property, in case anyone got it in their head to do something stupid. I let them in. I walked them to the dining room. My son stood up. He did not know who any of them were. Tessa stood up too, slower, and I watched her face do something I will never forget. The color drained out of it from the top down, like somebody pulling a shade. She said, "What is this?" I said, "Sit down, please. We have things to discuss." She did not sit down. So my lawyer pulled out the first folder and laid it on the table next to the turkey, and he began to read. He read for 45 minutes. He read the draft of the fake will. He read the sworn statement from the disbarred lawyer. He read the affidavit from the doctor, who, when faced with the alternative of losing his medical license, had been very forthcoming. He read the timeline of meetings at the Interstate Hotel. He read the financial records showing where Tessa had been wiring money, small amounts, regularly over 4 years, to an account in her own name that my son did not know existed. He read the text messages. Halfway through the text messages, my son sat down. He had been standing up the whole time, gripping the back of his chair. When my lawyer read the line about signing whatever we put in front of him, my son sat down so hard the chair creaked. He put his face in his hands. Tessa did not sit down. Tessa got louder and louder as it went on. She accused my lawyer of fabricating documents. She accused me of being senile, of being manipulated, of being a bitter old man who was punishing her for taking care of his son. She accused the investigator of stalking her. At one point, she picked up her wine glass and I thought she was going to throw it. And the deputy stepped forward from the doorway where he had been standing quietly, and she set the glass back down. When my lawyer was finished, he closed the folder. He looked at her over the top of his glasses. He said, "Ma'am, you have 2 options. Option 1 is you sign these papers acknowledging the dissolution of your marriage and the surrender of any claim to this property, and you walk out of this house tonight with what you came in with. Option 2 is we file all of this with the district attorney on Monday morning. I will let you choose." She chose option 1. She did not choose it gracefully. She broke a plate on her way out, and she screamed some things at me. I will not repeat, and she made a phone call from the porch to someone who did not pick up, and finally she got in her car and she drove away into the cold November night, and I never saw her again. The deputy stayed for another hour just to be sure. The investigator left. My lawyer stayed too, sitting at the table eating cold turkey because he said he was hungry and it was a shame to waste a bird. My son sat across from me. He had not moved from his chair. His face was gray. After a long time, he looked up at me and he said, "Dad." I said, "I know." He said, "Dad." I said, "I know, son. I know, son. I know." He cried. He cried the way he had cried at 16 in the passenger seat of my truck. I let him. I did not get up and put my arm around him because I was not ready to do that yet. I sat across from him at the dining room table and I let him cry. And after a while, my lawyer got up and went into the kitchen to wash the dishes because he is that kind of friend, and my son and I sat alone with the wreckage of his marriage and his life on the table between us. I said, "Your boy is upstairs." He said, "I know." I said, "He doesn't know any of this. He's not going to know any of this until he's old enough to understand it. And even then, we are going to tell it to him together, you and me, and we are going to tell it carefully. Do you hear me?" He nodded. I said. You are going to stay in the guest room until you find your feet. You are not going to drink in this house. You are going to go to a counselor that my friend in there is going to recommend to you, and you are going to go every week. You are going to find a job. You are going to be a father to that boy upstairs. And you are going to be the kind of father he deserves, because he is going to need you, and he is not going to have her, and he is not always going to have me. Do you understand? He nodded again. He could not speak. I said, and son, one more thing. He looked up. I said, if you ever, in your life, let anybody make you forget who you are again. If you ever go quiet at a table while somebody hurts somebody you love, I will not be there to bail you out. Your boy will not be there to bail you out. Your boy will not be there to bail you out. There's no third chance after this one. Do you understand me? He said, yes, sir. He had not called me sir since he was 19 years old. That was 2 Thanksgivings ago. My grandson is 10 now. He still does not know the whole story. He knows his mother left, and he knows she is not coming back, and he knows that some adults make bad choices and have to face the consequences. He knows that his father loves him. He knows that his papa is here and is not going anywhere, and that the workshop is open whenever he wants to come out and learn something. My son is 2 years sober, 14 months into a steady job, and has a small apartment of his own about 10 minutes from here. He still comes for Sunday dinner. He picks up my grandson every Friday and keeps him through the weekend. He is not the man he was at 30. He is becoming, slowly, the man I had hoped he might be. The man his mother believed he could become. We do not talk about Tessa. We do not need to. The photographs of my wife are back on the walls. I want to tell you, if you have made it this far, one thing. I have been thinking about it for a long time, and I want to say it carefully. When somebody you love is being hurt by somebody else you love, the temptation is to be quiet, to keep the peace. To tell yourself that intervening will make things worse. To tell yourself that you are old, that your time is past, that the next generation has to find its own way. That temptation is a lie. You are not too old. Your time is not past. Your house is your house. Your name is your name. And when the people who are supposed to love you turn out to be the people who are hurting you, the answer is not to swallow it down. The answer is not to make peace. The answer is to be patient, and to be quiet, and to keep your eyes open. And when the time comes, and the time will come, to stand up calmly at your own table, and to pass the gravy, and to wait for the doorbell to ring. That's the story. That's all of it. There's a bench up back I built last summer. Sits, too. Faces the garden my wife planted, which I have brought back to something close to what she would have wanted. Some evenings my grandson sits with me on it, and we don't talk about anything in particular. Some evenings I sit by myself. Both kinds of evenings are good ones. I've thought about that night 1,000 times since it happened, and the thing that keeps coming back to me is not the doorbell, not the deputy on the porch, not even Tessa's face when the color drained out of it. What keeps coming back to me is the 11 years before. The 11 years I sat in my own kitchen and let a stranger redecorate it. The 11 years I watched my own son shrink inside his own marriage and told myself it was none of my business. I want you to understand something. And I want to say it plain because I am too old now for fancy words. Every bad thing that happened in this house, I let happen. The picture hit the wall because I had spent a decade teaching that woman she could throw whatever she wanted and I would clean it up. My boy went silent at the table because I had been silent first for years, and a son learns what a father shows him. Cause and effect, that's all it is. The world keeps a ledger whether we look at it or not. The thing folks don't tell you about getting older is that you don't get wiser automatically. Wisdom is not a pension. It does not arrive in the mail on your 60th birthday. You'll have to go and earn it. And most of the time you earn it by being a fool first and paying attention to what the foolishness cost you. I paid $51,000 and most of my dignity to learn what I should have known the first time Tessa told me a lie I wanted to believe. So here is what I want to leave you with. There are 3 things a man needs to get through a life, like the one I've lived. And I am still working on all 3 of them at 64 years old. The first is a clear sense of right and wrong, and the courage to say it out loud when it matters, even at your own dinner table, even to people you love. The second is the patience to wait, and the eyes to see, and the discipline to not act on anger when acting on anger would feel good but would not actually fix anything. 8 months I waited, and those were the hardest 8 months of my life. But they were the months that saved my grandson's future. The third is the backbone to stand up, when standing up is the only thing left to do. To pass the gravy. To wait for the doorbell. To say the hard thing to your own boy across a wrecked table at midnight, even when his face is in his hands and you would rather cut your own arm off than say it. If you are sitting somewhere right now and there's somebody in your life who is hurting you, and you have been telling yourself that you are too old or too tired or too alone to do anything about it, please hear me. You are not. Your name is still your name. Your house is still your house. And the time you have left, however much of it there is, belongs to you. Not to them, to you. That is the only thing I know for sure.